She stood alone at the edge of the settlement, her small classroom empty behind her, one hand resting protectively over her swollen belly. Rebecca Taylor had always known teaching native children would bring consequences, but she never imagined it would cost her everything. As the town council approached with torches in the growing dusk, a figure watched silently from the distant tree line, Mahkah, son of Chief Wanbli, whose people were about to change this outcast teacher's fate forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first snow of winter had fallen across Oakridge, coating the Dakota Territory in pristine white that belied the tension brewing beneath. Rebecca Taylor had arrived 6 months earlier when the prairie grasses still swayed green and gold in the summer breeze. The daughter of a minister from Boston, she had traveled west with dreams of bringing education to frontier children. The small settlement had welcomed her initially. A proper, educated young woman willing to establish a schoolhouse at the edge of civilization was considered nothing short of a blessing. "The Lord has sent us exactly what we need," Pastor Gardner had declared during her first Sunday service, his voice booming through the wooden church. "Our children must be educated if we are to build a proper Christian town in this wilderness." Rebecca had nodded politely, though her vision extended beyond what the pastor had articulated. In her heart, education wasn't merely about taming the wilderness, but understanding it and understanding all its people. That first day at the Prairie Learning House, a modest one-room building constructed hastily by the townsmen, 15 children from Oakridge sat in neat rows on rough-hewn benches. Rebecca moved with quiet confidence among them, her dark hair pulled back severely, her posture impeccable despite the morning sickness that had plagued her for weeks. No one in town knew about her condition yet. Her high-necked dresses and modest aprons concealed the subtle changes in her figure. "Today, we begin a journey together," she told the children, her voice soft but unwavering. "Knowledge is a gift that, once given, can never be taken away." What the settlers didn't know was that Rebecca had left Boston carrying more than educational materials. She carried the child of a man who had promised to follow her west, but vanished instead, leaving her to face her future alone. The ring she wore, a simple band that prevented questions, belonged to no husband. It was this secret, as much as her determination, that had driven her to seek a fresh start, far from judgmental eyes. For the first month, Rebecca taught reading, writing, and arithmetic exactly as expected. The children progressed quickly under her patient guidance. The settlement mothers brought her pies and preserves. The fathers tipped their hats respectfully when she passed. Thomas Bennett, who oversaw most town affairs, even mentioned plans to expand the schoolhouse come spring. But everything changed. The autumn morning, Rebecca discovered 3 Lakota children lingering at the schoolhouse window. She had been writing multiplication tables on the chalkboard when a flicker of movement caught her eye. There, peering through the glass with undisguised curiosity, were 2 boys and a girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old. Their dark eyes tracked the chalk in Rebecca's hand, watched the white numbers appear on the black surface with evident fascination. The Oakridge children had frozen in their seats, some turning to stare, others keeping their eyes firmly forward as they had been taught whenever Indians were near. Rebecca paused only briefly before continuing her lesson, but she left the window uncovered, something the other town women never did when Lakota people passed through. When the school day ended, Rebecca watched the native children retreat toward Willow Creek, the natural boundary between the settlers and the Lakota encampment. Something about their retreating figures stirred a resolve in her that had been building since her arrival. That evening, she approached Thomas Bennett's home, knocking firmly on the door with the confidence she didn't entirely feel. "Miss Taylor," Bennett greeted her, surprise evident in his tone. "Is everything all right at the schoolhouse?" "Perfectly fine, Mr. Bennett," Rebecca replied. "I've come with a proposal. I noticed Lakota children watching our lessons today. I believe we should invite them to attend school alongside our children." Bennett's expression hardened immediately. "That would be impossible." "Why?" Rebecca pressed. "They showed interest in learning. Surely education—" "Miss Taylor," Bennett interrupted, lowering his voice. "You are new to these territories. The natives have their ways, we have ours. Mixing the two invites trouble we cannot afford. Education is universal," Rebecca insisted. "All children deserve—" "What they deserve and what is practical are different matters," Bennett said with finality. "I suggest you focus on the children already in your care." Rebecca left with a polite nod, but an unchanged mind. That night, she sat in her small room, adjacent to the schoolhouse, one hand resting on her growing belly as she wrote in her journal. "Some boundaries exist not because they should, but because no one has yet found the courage to cross them." The next morning, Rebecca arrived at school earlier than usual. She placed a slate and chalk at the end of each bench, including 3 extras at the back of the room. When her Oakridge pupils arrived, no one commented on the additional spaces, though several cast curious glances. Rebecca taught as usual, but left the door ajar despite the autumn chill. An hour into lessons, shadows darkened the doorway. The same 3 Lakota children stood hesitantly at the threshold, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The classroom fell silent. Rebecca smiled and gestured to the empty benches at the back. "Please, come in. We're learning about numbers today." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then the oldest of the native children, a boy with serious eyes, stepped inside, followed by his companions. They sat cautiously, and Rebecca continued her lesson as if nothing unusual had occurred, though her heart pounded with the significance of the moment. By midday, word had spread through Oakridge. As children returned home for lunch, parents were already gathering at Bennett's house. Rebecca ate her simple meal alone in the schoolhouse, watching through the window as a heated discussion took place in the street outside. When afternoon lessons began, half her settler pupils were missing. The 3 Lakota children, however, returned, joined now by 2 more. Rebecca taught fractions to this divided classroom, acutely aware of the metaphor playing out before her. As the school day ended, Rebecca stood at the door, watching her new pupils walk toward Willow Creek. One of them, the girl, turned back and smiled shyly. Rebecca raised her hand in farewell, unaware that this simple gesture was being observed by Sarah Miller, the blacksmith's wife, who had become her only friend in Oakridge. "You're courting trouble, Rebecca," Sarah warned, approaching from the direction of town. Bennett is furious. Pastor Gardner is already calling a special service to address the Indian problem at school. "They're children, Sarah," Rebecca replied quietly. "They want to learn. How can that be a problem?" Sarah sighed, glancing toward the distant figures of the Lakota children. "It's not about what they want. It's about—" She gestured vaguely at the space between the settlement and the native encampment. "This isn't Boston. There's history here. Blood spilled on both sides." "All the more reason for change," Rebecca insisted. "The next generation needn't inherit our conflicts." Sarah studied her friend's face, then lowered her gaze to Rebecca's midsection, where her condition was becoming increasingly difficult to conceal. "You're fighting more battles than one, aren't you?" Rebecca's hand moved instinctively to her belly. "I don't know what you mean." "I was a midwife back east," Sarah said gently. "I recognize the signs. How far along?" Rebecca hesitated, then whispered, 5 months. "And there's no husband following behind?" "No." Sarah took Rebecca's hand, her expression softening. "You need to be careful. 1 scandal they might overlook for your teaching skills. 2, she left the sentence unfinished. Rebecca squeezed her friend's hand gratefully, but her resolve remained unchanged. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The following day, 8 Lakota children attended her lessons. The day after, only 5 Oakridge children remained, but the native attendance had grown to 12. Rebecca adapted, teaching in both English and the few Lakota words she'd begun. To learn, she separated the children not by origin, but by ability, creating mixed groups where settler and native children worked together. To her satisfaction, they began to overcome their initial wariness, small hands occasionally reaching across cultural divides to share slates or help with difficult letters. It was during this fragile experiment, 2 weeks after it began, that Rebecca first noticed him, a tall figure observing from the tree line beyond the schoolyard. Unlike the other adults from either community, he made no attempt to call the children away or interfere. He simply watched, his expression unreadable. At that distance, the 4th time she noticed his presence, Rebecca gathered her courage and walked toward him after dismissing the children. He didn't retreat as she approached, which she took as permission to continue. "Do you have children attending my school?" she asked when close enough to speak without shouting. The man seemed surprised by her direct address. "No," he replied, in clear English, "but my sister's children speak of the pale-skinned teacher who does not turn them away." His eyes, dark and perceptive, studied her face. "I wanted to see this unusual woman for myself." "I'm Rebecca Taylor," she said, extending her hand as she would to any parent. After a moment's hesitation, he took it. "Mahkah." His grip was firm, but brief. Up close, Rebecca could see he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with a dignity that made him seem older. He wore traditional Lakota clothing, but she noticed a book partially visible in the pouch at his waist. "You read?" she asked, nodding toward it. A flicker of something, amusement or approval, crossed his features. "A missionary taught me many winters ago, before relations soured between our peoples. And now they can improve again," Rebecca said. "Through understanding, through education." Mahkah's expression grew serious. "The children may be welcome in your school, but your teachings will not be welcome among those who fear what knowledge might bring." "Which people do you mean?" Rebecca asked. "Yours or mine?" "Both," he answered simply. Before they could speak, further, a shout came from the direction of town. Thomas Bennett was striding toward them, his face thunderous. Mahkah nodded once to Rebecca, then turned and disappeared into the trees with remarkable speed. "Miss Taylor!" Bennett called as he approached. "Step away from there at once." Rebecca stood her ground. "I was merely speaking with a parent." "He is no parent," Bennett snapped, "but the son of Chief Wanbli, and no proper teacher holds secret meetings with savages at the edge of the wilderness." "There was nothing secret about our conversation," Rebecca replied evenly. "And I've found nothing savage in any of the Lakota people I've met." Bennett's jaw tightened. "The town council meets tonight. Your experiment will be discussed." His eyes dropped briefly to her midsection, now visibly rounded beneath her dress, as will other matters of concern. As he walked away, Rebecca placed a protective hand over her child. The confrontation she had known would come was finally at hand. That evening, Rebecca sat alone in her room, listening to the murmur of angry voices from the town hall. She had not been invited to the council meeting, a clear indication of its probable outcome. Through her window, she could see torches and lanterns gathered in the town square as virtually every adult in Oakridge attended. A soft knock on her door startled her. Sarah Miller stood outside, her expression grave. "You need to pack whatever you can carry," Sarah whispered, stepping inside and closing the door. "They voted. Bennett and the pastor have convinced everyone that you've been corrupted by Indian ways, that you're unfit to teach their children." Her eyes dropped meaningfully to Rebecca's belly. "My condition has nothing to do with my ability to teach, Rebecca protested. It has everything to do with their judgment of your character, Sarah replied sadly. And they believe a woman of questionable virtue shouldn't influence their children or encourage relations with the Lakota. Rebecca felt a cold wave of fear. What will they do? They're coming tonight to escort you to the stagecoach stop at Fort Harrison. They've collected money for your passage east. Sarah pressed a small pouch into Rebecca's hand. I've brought what extra I could. It isn't much. Rebecca stared at the pouch, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. I can't go back east, Sarah. There's nothing for me there. The shame awaiting an unmarried expectant mother would be even greater. In Boston than here, Sarah bit her lip. Then you need another plan, quickly. They'll be here within the hour. As if summoned by her words, shouts erupted from the town square. Rebecca moved to the window and saw the crowd beginning to move toward the schoolhouse, torches lighting their way through the early evening darkness. It's too late, she whispered. Sarah gripped her arm. The back door. Go now, I'll tell them you're gathering your things. Where would I go? Rebecca asked, desperation edging into her voice. Anywhere but here, Sarah urged. The woods for now. I'll try to find you before morning. Rebecca grabbed her shawl and a small bag already packed with her most essential possessions. She had sensed this moment approaching and had prepared for it subconsciously, even as she hoped it would never come. With a quick embrace for her only friend, Rebecca slipped out the back door of the schoolhouse and into the gathering darkness. Behind her, the voices grew louder as the townspeople approached, their torches creating long shadows that seemed to reach for her like accusing fingers. She moved as quickly as her condition allowed, heading not toward the safety of the eastern road but west, toward Willow Creek and the territory beyond. The same boundary her Lakota pupils crossed each day now represented her only chance at escape. The early winter night was bitter cold and snow had begun to fall again, quickly covering her tracks. Rebecca pulled her shawl tighter, one hand supporting her belly as she navigated the unfamiliar terrain. Behind her, shouts indicated the discovery of her absence. A dog barked and panic surged through her. She increased her pace, no longer certain of her direction in the darkness and swirling snow. The ground sloped suddenly, and Rebecca lost her footing, sliding down a short embankment. She landed with a jolt that sent a sharp pain through her abdomen. For several terrifying moments she lay still, praying the fall hadn't harmed her child. When the pain subsided, she struggled to her feet, disoriented and increasingly afraid. The voices from town had faded, but now the greater danger was the wilderness itself. Cold, darkness and wild animals posed threats she had no defense against. Rebecca pushed forward, each step becoming more difficult than the last. The snow fell harder, her thin shoes and dress providing little protection against the elements. After what seemed like hours, her strength began to fail. Vision blurring, she stumbled against a tree trunk and slid to its base, no longer able to continue. I'm sorry, little one, she thought, cradling her belly as consciousness began to fade. I tried to build a world where you would be welcome. Through the haze of approaching unconsciousness, Rebecca became aware of a figure moving toward her through the snow. Tall and wrapped in furs, more shadow than substance in the darkness. She struggled to focus her eyes, wondering if death took such a form in these wild lands. But the figure was solid, real, crouching beside her, with a face she recognized even through her dimming awareness. Mahkah, she whispered. Be still, he replied, his voice seeming to come from very far away. You are found. Strong arms lifted her from the snow, and Rebecca surrendered to the darkness, her last conscious thought a prayer that whatever came next would be better than what she was leaving behind. The sensation of warmth gradually penetrated Rebecca's awareness. She opened her eyes to find herself in an unfamiliar dwelling, lying on soft furs near a central fire. The structure was nothing like the wooden homes of Oakridge. This was a large teepee, its smoke flap partially open to allow the fire's exhaust to escape while snow continued to fall outside. She struggled to sit up, immediately concerned for her child. A gentle movement within her belly reassured her, bringing tears of relief to her eyes. "The little one is strong, like its mother," came a woman's voice. Rebecca turned to see an elderly Lakota woman watching her from across the fire. Her face was deeply lined, her long gray hair divided into 2 braids, but her eyes were sharp and assessing. "Where am I?" Rebecca asked, her voice raspy from cold and exhaustion. "My son brought you to our winter camp," the woman replied in accented but clear English. "I am Mahkah, mother of Mahkah." "You saved my life," Rebecca said. Oh, you," the old woman made a dismissive gesture. "Thank my son when he returns. He followed you from the moment you left your school building." She handed Rebecca a wooden cup filled with a fragrant tea. "Drink. Good for mother and child." Rebecca accepted the tea gratefully, taking small sips of the unfamiliar brew. "The people of Oakridge will not find you here," Mahkah stated firmly. "The snow covers all traces, and we are far beyond the creek now." She studied Rebecca thoughtfully. "My son says you teach our children alongside the white children, that you do not separate them or make them feel less." Rebecca nodded. "Education should be for everyone who seeks it." "A dangerous belief," the old woman commented, "for both our peoples." "Is knowledge truly dangerous?" Rebecca asked. Mahkah smiled slightly. "Knowledge itself, no. But those who fear change will always fear those who bring it." She gestured toward Rebecca's rounded belly. "You carry more than one kind of new life within you." Before Rebecca could respond, the teepee flap opened, and Mahkah entered, bringing a gust of cold air with him. He carried a bundle of firewood, which he set carefully beside the central fire before turning his attention to Rebecca. "You are awake," he observed, his expression revealing relief. "The fever has broken." Fever? Rebecca hadn't realized she'd been ill. "The cold nearly took you," Mahkah explained, removing his outer furs. "You have slept through 2 days and nights." Rebecca's hand went to her throat in shock. 2 days, but the settlement, they must be searching. "They searched for 1 day only," Mahkah said, his tone neutral. "The storm drove them back. They believe you tried to reach Fort Harrison and perished in the snow." The reality of her situation struck Rebecca fully. To Oakridge, she was already dead. A cautionary tale about a woman who had violated their social boundaries. Yet here she sat, very much alive, in the heart of a Lakota winter camp. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Mahkah and his mother exchanged a glance before he answered. "That depends on what you wish. When the storm passes, we could take you to Fort Harrison if that is your desire." Rebecca considered this option briefly. The fort might offer temporary shelter, but as an unmarried pregnant woman with no connections or prospects, her future, there would be bleak at best. "And if that is not my desire?" she asked carefully. Mahkah sat across from her, his gaze direct. "Then you must speak with my father. Chief Wanbli arrived while you slept. He wishes to understand the woman who taught our children when others would not." Fear flickered through Rebecca. The chief would surely have concerns about harboring someone the settlers had cast out. Her presence could create tension between the communities, perhaps even danger for the Lakota. "I don't want to bring trouble to your people," she said honestly. Mahkah made a soft sound that might have been laughter. "Trouble finds all peoples, regardless of their wishes. The question is whether what comes with the trouble is worth its cost." A shadow fell across the teepee entrance, and a commanding figure ducked inside. Chief Wanbli was older than Rebecca had expected, his face deeply lined like his wife's, his long hair streaked with gray. but he carried himself with unmistakable authority, and his sharp eyes missed nothing as they assessed. Mahkah rose respectfully as his father entered. Words were exchanged in Lakota, too quick for Rebecca to catch even the few phrases she had learned from her pupils. Then the chief turned his attention fully to her. "So," he said in English, as fluent as his son's, "you are the teacher." Rebecca straightened as much as her condition allowed. "I am." "My grandchildren speak of you with respect," the chief continued, seating himself beside the fire. "They say you treat them as equals to the white children, that you learn their words as they learn yours." "It seemed only fair," Rebecca replied. "I asked them to learn from me. I should be willing to learn from them in return." Chief Wanbli studied her for a long moment. "And for this, your people cast you out." Rebecca's hand moved instinctively to her belly. "Not only for that." The chief nodded, understanding immediately. "Two transgressions, then, teaching our children and carrying life without a husband." He said it without judgment, merely stating facts. "Yes, and now you have nowhere to go." It wasn't a question, but Rebecca answered anyway. "No." Wanbli glanced at his son, whose expression remained carefully neutral, then back to Rebecca. "My son tells me you defended our children when the settlement leaders demanded you send them away, that you continued teaching them even when it cost you the support of your own people." "They deserved an education," Rebecca said simply. "And what do you deserve?" the chief asked. The question caught Rebecca off guard. No one had asked what she deserved since she discovered her pregnancy and begun her journey west. She had been too focused on survival, on finding a place where she could build a life for herself and her child. "A chance," she finally answered. "For myself and my baby." Chief Wanbli nodded slowly, as if her answer confirmed something he had already suspected. "Among our people, children are sacred gifts, regardless of how or when they come into the world, and those who share knowledge are valued." He paused, his gaze intense. "If you wish it, you may remain with us until your child is born. After that, you can decide your path forward." Rebecca stared at him in disbelief. "You would offer sanctuary to a stranger, a white woman." "I offer sanctuary to a teacher who honored my grandchildren when others would not," Wanbli corrected. "The color of your skin matters less than the content of your actions." Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes, the emotional and physical strain of the past days finally overwhelming her composure. "Thank you," she whispered. The chief stood, signaling the end of their conversation. "Rest now. Regain your strength." He glanced meaningfully at his son before ducking out of the teepee. In the silence that followed, Rebecca became aware of Mahkah. Watching her, his expression thoughtful. "Your father is very generous," she said. "He is wise," Mahkah replied. "He sees value where others see only difference." He hesitated, then added, "As do you." Their eyes met across the fire, and Rebecca felt something shift between them, a recognition of shared purpose perhaps, or a deeper understanding. Whatever it was, it felt like the beginning of something neither had anticipated when circumstances first brought them together. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the prairie in white. Within the teepee's warm circle, Rebecca felt for the first time since leaving Boston that she had found not just shelter, but the possibility of belonging. As days turned into weeks, Rebecca slowly integrated into the rhythms of Lakota life. Her strength returned, her pregnancy progressed without complications, and she began to learn the language and customs of the people who had taken her in. Winter settled fully across the plains, transforming the Lakota winter camp into a world of white and shadow. Rebecca's days took on a pattern unlike anything she had known in her previous life. Each morning she woke before dawn to help Mahkah prepare the day's first meal, learning through observation and gentle correction how to tend the fire properly, how to prepare the various foods that sustained the community through the harsh season. Her limited Lakota vocabulary grew daily, not through formal lessons, but through necessity and immersion. The children especially proved eager teachers, delighting in her attempts to master their language and laughing good-naturedly at her inevitable mistakes. In the evenings, Rebecca found herself surrounded by young ones in Mahkah's teepee, continuing her role as educator in this new context. Using sticks to write in the earth near the fire, she taught letters and numbers while learning the Lakota words for the same concepts. Your belly grows, but your spirit grows stronger, Mahkah observed one evening as the last of the children departed. The older woman had become something of a mentor to Rebecca, guiding her through the intricacies of Lakota customs with patience and occasional wry humor. I feel more myself here than I have anywhere, Rebecca admitted, one hand resting on her 7-month swell. Even though everything is different, Mahkah nodded sagely. Sometimes we must travel far from what we know to discover who we truly are. Rebecca considered this wisdom as she prepared for sleep that night. The elderly woman had allocated her a section of the family teepee, affording her what privacy was possible in the communal living arrangement. As she settled onto her sleeping furs, Rebecca reflected on how rapidly adaptation had come. The wooden floors and starched linens of her Boston upbringing now seemed like artifacts from another life entirely. Her thoughts were interrupted by Mahkah's entrance. He had been hunting with several other men, and the expedition had kept him away for 3 days. Snow dusted his shoulders as he stepped inside, bringing with him the sharp scent of winter air. "The hunting was good?" his mother inquired. "Good enough," he replied, removing his outer garments. "2 deer and a buffalo. The meat is being prepared now." His eyes met Rebecca's briefly across the fire, and she felt the now familiar warmth that his presence invariably sparked. Their interactions remained formal and cautious, but Rebecca had grown increasingly aware of a connection between them, one that transcended the circumstances of her arrival. "Your father calls a council tonight," Mahkah informed him. "The trader brought news from the east." Mahkah's expression darkened slightly. "What news?" "Soldiers. More coming in spring." She glanced toward Rebecca. "The settlement at Oakridge has requested additional protection after reports of Indian troubles." Rebecca straightened, alarm coursing through her. "But there have been no troubles. The Lakota have kept well away from Oakridge since I've been here." "Truth matters less than perception," Mahkah said grimly, "and some would create trouble to justify their fears." The implication was clear. Rebecca's disappearance might have been attributed to the storm, but suspicions likely remained. Her presumed death could easily become a rallying cry for those in the settlement who viewed the Lakota with hostility. "I should speak with your father," she said, moving to rise. "Explain that no one here harmed me." Mahkah placed a restraining hand on Rebecca's arm. "Not tonight. The men will counsel, and then we will know what must be done." Rebecca subsided reluctantly. Despite 3 months living among the Lakota, she sometimes forgot that her status was that of a guest, not a member of the tribe with a voice in decisions. Still, the thought that her presence might inadvertently bring danger to these people who had sheltered her was deeply troubling. Later that night, unable to sleep, Rebecca heard Mahkah return from the council. His conversation with his mother was conducted in low tones and rapid Lakota, but Rebecca caught enough words to understand the general tenor. Tension, preparation, vigilance. The following morning, activity in the camp increased noticeably. Women began packing non-essential items, men checked weapons, and scouts were dispatched in multiple directions. Rebecca helped where she could, but anxiety gnawed at her. When she spotted Mahkah conferring with several other men near the edge of camp, she approached, despite knowing her interruption might not be welcome. "What's happening?" she asked when there was a break in their conversation. The other men moved, away discreetly, leaving Mahkah to address her question. "We're preparing to move deeper into our territory," he explained, "away from the settlement borders." "Because of me?" Mahkah's expression softened slightly. "Not only. This is the way of our people. We move with the seasons. But yes, my father believes it wise to create distance between our camp and Oakridge before spring brings the soldiers." Rebecca felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on her shoulders. "Perhaps I should go to Fort Harrison after all. I could tell them the truth." "And what truth is that?" Mahkah asked quietly. "That you chose to teach Lakota children? That you fled into a snowstorm rather than return east? That you've lived among us these months?" He shook his head. "Such truths would only confirm their worst suspicions about both you and us." "Then, what can I do?" Rebecca asked, frustration evident in her voice. "I don't want to be the cause of conflict." Mahkah was silent for a moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her heart quicken. "You have already chosen your path by crossing the creek that night," he finally said. "Now you must walk it fully wherever it leads." Something in his tone suggested layers of meaning beyond the literal. But before Rebecca could question him, further, a commotion rose from the southern edge of camp. A scout was returning, riding hard, and the urgency of his approach signaled trouble. The camp mobilized swiftly after the scout's report. A hunting party from Oakridge had ventured unusually far into Lakota Territory and spotted one of the scouts. Pursuit had been brief but concerning. The settlers were armed and had fired shots, though no one was injured. "It begins already," Chief Wanbli declared, his face grim as he ordered immediate preparations for departure. "We move north to Whispering Valley before sunset." The valley lay 3 days' journey away, beyond a ridge of hills that would provide natural protection and obscure their presence from anyone searching from the south. It was a traditional refuge for the tribe during times of tension with white settlers. Rebecca worked alongside the women, helping to dismantle teepees and pack travois despite her advanced pregnancy. The physical labor was challenging in her condition, but she was determined not to be a burden. As she struggled to secure a bundle of furs, Mahkah appeared beside her. "Not so tight," the older woman instructed, loosening Rebecca's knots. "The journey is long, and too tight bindings chafe." Rebecca nodded, grateful for the correction. "Will we be safe in this valley?" Mahkah's weathered hands worked deftly with the bindings. "Safer than here. The spirits of our ancestors dwell in those hills, and they have protected us before. And your people don't mind moving because of me?" Rebecca couldn't help asking. The older woman gave her a shrewd look. "My son told you we move with the seasons." "This is true. But sometimes the seasons of conflict come sooner than expected." She patted Rebecca's hand. "Do not carry more weight than belongs to you. The troubles between our peoples existed long before you crossed the creek." By midday, the camp had been reduced to bundles and packs loaded onto horses and travois. Rebecca watched with admiration as the organized chaos resolved into an orderly procession ready to depart. Chief Wanbli led, with the warriors positioned around the periphery of the group. Families traveled together, elderly members and children secured on horseback or travois, while able-bodied adults walked. Mahkah approached as Rebecca stood wondering where she was expected to fit within this caravan. He led a dappled mare, already saddled. "For you," he said simply, "the journey would be too difficult on foot in your condition." Rebecca eyed the horse uncertainly. "I've never ridden before." A flicker of surprise crossed Mahkah's face, followed by what might have been amusement. "Then today you learn." He helped her mount, adjusting the stirrups and showing her how to hold the reins. "She is gentle and follows the group. You need only stay balanced." Rebecca gripped the saddle nervously as the mare shifted beneath her. The height made her dizzy initially, but she forced herself to relax. Mahkah remained beside her, one hand on the bridle until he was satisfied she wouldn't fall. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. I don't know how I'll ever repay your family's kindness." Mahkah looked up at her, his expression serious. "There is no debt between us. You taught our children when others would not. Now we teach you our ways. The circle is complete." There was something in his eyes that made Rebecca wonder if they were still speaking merely of practical matters. But before she could respond, the signal to move out rippled through the group. Mahkah gave the mare a gentle pat and moved away to take his position among the warriors. The journey north was arduous, despite the preparations. Winter winds cut across the open plains, and brief squalls of snow periodically reduced visibility. To mere feet ahead, Rebecca found riding more taxing than she had anticipated, the constant motion aggravating the aches in her lower back and hips. By the first nightfall, every muscle in her body protested, and dismounting required Mahkah Yangji's assistance. "The second day is always worse," the older woman warned as she helped Rebecca settle near a hastily constructed fire. "But the third day brings strength you didn't know you possessed." Camp that night was minimal, just enough shelter to break the wind and contain the fire's warmth. The tribe's progress had been good, but tension remained palpable. Guards were posted, and conversations were kept low. Rebecca slept fitfully, her dreams punctuated by phantom hoofbeats and distant shouts. The second day dawned clear but bitterly, cold. As Mahkah had predicted, Rebecca's body rebelled at the thought of remounting, but she did so without complaint. She noticed Mahkah watching her from a distance, his expression unreadable. Throughout the day, he rode the perimeter of the group, conferring with scouts and vigilant for any sign of pursuit. By midday, the rolling plains began to give way to more varied terrain. Low hills rose in the distance, their slopes covered with pine and bare-branched deciduous trees. Rebecca found herself mesmerized by the changing landscape, so different from the settled farmlands of her eastern upbringing or the stark winter prairie around Oakridge. "Beautiful, isn't it?" came a voice beside her. Mahkah had ridden up while she was distracted by the view. "Very," she agreed. "Is that where we're going?" He nodded. "Whispering Valley lies beyond those first hills. We'll reach the foothills by nightfall and make our way through a pass tomorrow." Rebecca studied his profile as he surveyed the land ahead. There was a tension in his jawline that hadn't been there when she first met him months ago. "You're worried about pursuit," she observed. Mahkah didn't immediately respond, and Rebecca thought he might ignore the comment. Finally, he said, "Not pursuit as much as what comes after. The settlers will send word to Fort Harrison that Lakota warriors fired on their hunting party." "But that's not what happened," Rebecca protested. "The truth rarely survives the telling when it passes from one people to another," Mahkah replied. "By spring, the story will be of an unprovoked attack, just as your disappearance likely became a story of abduction and murder, not a woman seeking refuge from injustice." Rebecca considered this sobering assessment. "Is there no way to prevent such misunderstandings?" "Understanding requires willingness on both sides," Mahkah said, "and some prefer the comfort of their fears to the challenge of new truths." He glanced at her. "You were rare in that regard." Before Rebecca could respond to this unexpected praise, a scout rode up with news that temporarily eased the tension. There was no sign of pursuit, and the weather was worsening behind them, which would cover their tracks and discourage any followers. That night's camp was more substantial, situated in a sheltered area at the base of the foothills. With the relative security of their position, spirits lifted around the fires. Someone produced a drum, and soft singing rose into the night air. Rebecca sat with Mahkah, watching the firelight play across the faces of her companions, struck by how familiar they had all become in the relatively short time she'd lived among them. "Your thoughts are far away," Mahkah observed. "Not far," Rebecca replied, "just reflecting on how quickly life can change. 6 months ago, I was teaching in a proper schoolhouse, certain of my path. Now I'm here, carrying a child, fleeing with people I once thought of as strangers. And now? Are we still strangers to you?" Rebecca shook her head firmly. "No, you're—" She hesitated, searching for the right word. "Family," she finally said, though even that didn't fully capture the complex bonds that had formed. Mahkah smiled, the firelight deepening the lines around her eyes. "Good, because a child needs more than one heart to hold it." She nodded toward Rebecca's rounded belly. "Your little one will have many to welcome it when the time comes." The thought brought unexpected tears to Rebecca's eyes. The rejection she'd experienced in Oakridge had left deeper wounds than she'd acknowledged, but here, against all expectations, she had found acceptance. "My son watches you," Mahkah added casually, her gaze moving to where Mahkah sat, across the fire with several other men. Not just as a protector watches, but as a man sees a woman. Heat that had nothing to do with the fire rushed to Rebecca's cheeks. "I'm sure you're mistaken," she murmured, though her heart quickened at the observation. "I'm carrying another man's child." "The past is a closed door," Mahkah said, with a dismissive gesture. "What matters is who stands beside you when the new door opens." She patted Rebecca's hand. "Sleep now. Tomorrow's journey will be steeper." Rebecca lay awake long after the older woman had fallen asleep, her mind too full for rest. She was acutely aware of Mahkah's presence, even when he wasn't directly in her sight, a hyper-awareness she'd been trying to attribute to gratitude rather than confronting its true nature. But Mahkah's words had brought the unacknowledged feelings into the open, forcing Rebecca to examine them. There was no denying that Mahkah had come to occupy a central place in her thoughts. His quiet strength, his evident care for his people, the occasional glimpses of humor that softened his serious demeanor, all had gradually woven themselves into her consciousness. Yet the barriers between them seemed insurmountable. Not only was she carrying another man's child, but she remained an outsider, accepted perhaps, but never truly one of the tribe. And what of Mahkah's feelings? Had his mother simply misinterpreted a man's natural concern for someone under his protection? The thought brought a pang of disappointment that confirmed what Rebecca had been avoiding. Somewhere along the way, her feelings for Mahkah had deepened into something far more complex than gratitude. Morning arrived before she'd fully resolved. These thoughts, bringing with it the final and most challenging day of their journey. The pass through the hills was narrow in places, requiring single-file progress. Rebecca found herself riding between Mahkah and a young mother with an infant, their position in the middle of the procession, where they'd be most protected in case of trouble. The ascent was gradual but persistent, winding through stands of pine that offered welcome shelter from the wind. By midday, they had reached the highest point of the pass, where the trail widened into a small plateau. The group paused there, allowing horses and people to rest before the descent into Whispering Valley. Rebecca carefully dismounted, glad for the opportunity to stretch her legs and ease the constant pressure on her back. She walked a short distance to the edge of the plateau, where the view opened spectacularly before her. Below, nestled between protective hills, lay a verdant valley bisected by a meandering stream. Even in winter, it was beautiful, sheltered, secretive, and seemingly untouched by the conflicts of the world beyond the hills. "Now you see why we call it Whispering Valley," came Mahkah's voice behind her. "The wind moves constantly through. The trees like many voices speaking at once. Rebecca hadn't noticed him approach, but she welcomed his presence beside her. "It's wonderful," she said truthfully, "like a hidden world." "It has sheltered our people for many generations," Mahkah replied. "When trouble comes from outside, we return to the valley's embrace." Rebecca turned to look at him, struck by the mixture of pride and concern in his expression as he surveyed the valley. "You don't think the soldiers will find it?" "Not easily," he said. "The pass we've taken is one of several, and all are difficult to navigate without knowledge of the land. Even if they searched, spring thaws would make most approaches impassable." This reassurance eased some of Rebecca's worry, but not all. "And when summer comes, will it be safe to leave then?" Mahkah's gaze shifted to her. "You're thinking ahead to your child's birth." It wasn't a question, but Rebecca nodded. "By then I'll need to decide where our future lies." "And where do you see that future?" Mahkah asked, his tone carefully neutral. Rebecca looked back toward the valley, considering. "I don't know," she admitted. "Not Oakridge, certainly. Perhaps Fort Harrison or further west." She hesitated, then added softly, "Or perhaps somewhere closer." She felt, rather than saw, Mahkah's attention sharpen. "You would consider staying with the people?" "If I were welcome," Rebecca said, her heart pounding as she ventured into territory as uncertain as any wilderness. "If there was a place for us." "There is always place for those who belong," Mahkah replied, his voice low. "And belonging is not about blood or birth, but about where the heart finds home." Rebecca turned to meet his gaze directly, finding in his eyes the confirmation of what Mahkah had suggested, that his interest went beyond duty or compassion. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. "My heart has been wandering. A long time," she said carefully, "but lately it's been finding reasons to stay still." Mahkah stepped closer, close enough that Rebecca could feel the warmth radiating from him in the crisp mountain air. "Then perhaps you should listen to what it tells you." The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility, until a call from the head of the column broke the spell. It was time to continue their descent. The trail down into the valley was steeper than the ascent, requiring Rebecca's full attention to maintain her balance on horseback. By the time they reached the valley floor, the short winter day was fading rapidly. Camp was established with practiced efficiency on a plateau above the stream, where remnants of previous encampments were evident. That night, as fires blazed, against the darkness and the tribe celebrated their safe arrival, Rebecca found herself observing the interactions around her with new eyes. Children played, couples sat close together, elders told stories, the rhythms of a community that had maintained its essence despite generations of pressure from the outside world. For the first time, Rebecca could envision herself and her child as part of this tapestry, not just temporary threads soon to be pulled away. Across the main fire, Mahkah sat in council with his father and the other tribal leaders. Their discussion seemed intense, with much gesturing toward the passes they had traversed and occasional glances in the direction from which they had come. Rebecca couldn't hear their words, but the gravity of their expressions suggested ongoing concern about the situation they had left behind. Later, as the fires burned lower and people began retiring to the shelters that had been erected, Mahkah approached where Rebecca sat with his mother. "The scouts report no sign of pursuit," he informed them, crouching beside their fire. "We'll begin constructing proper winter lodges tomorrow. The valley will provide well for us." "The deer will be plentiful this year," Mahkah predicted, gathering her things as she rose. "I can feel it in my bones." With a knowing glance between Rebecca and her son, the older woman retreated to their temporary shelter, leaving them alone by the fire. The significance of her departure wasn't lost on Rebecca, who suddenly felt uncharacteristically shy. Mahkah settled beside her, his gaze on the flames. "You should rest too. The journey has been long, especially in your condition." "I'm stronger than I look," Rebecca replied, a hint of defensiveness in her tone. A small smile touched Mahkah's lips. "Of that I have no doubt." He glanced at her. "You've surprised many among our people. Few expected the white teacher to adapt so readily to our ways." "I've had good teachers of my own," Rebecca said. The firelight cast his features in warm relief, highlighting the strong lines of his jaw and the intensity of his dark eyes. She found herself wanting to reach out, to bridge the small physical distance between them that seemed to represent so much more. Instead, she asked a question that had been forming in her mind since their conversation on the plateau. "Mahkah, if I did stay, after the baby comes, what would that mean? For me, for the child?" He considered her question carefully before answering. "It would mean becoming part of the people in all ways, learning our language fully, our traditions, our beliefs. It would mean your child would be raised as Lakota, knowing both their mother's heritage and their adopted peoples. And would the tribe accept that? A white woman and her child as truly one of them? Some would resist at first," Mahkah acknowledged honestly. "But acceptance would come in time, as it already has begun to." Rebecca nodded, appreciating his candor. "And you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What would it mean to you if I stayed?" The directness of her question seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment, the carefully maintained composure he typically projected faltered, revealing something more vulnerable beneath. "It would mean," he said slowly, "that the path I have seen in my thoughts would become real. A path where you walk beside me, not as someone protected, but as an equal, as a partner." The word hung in the air between them, its implications rippling outward. Rebecca had suspected, hoped even, but hearing it stated so plainly made her breath catch. "I have nothing to offer you," she said, voicing the doubt that immediately surfaced. "No status, no family connections, not even a clear future. You offer yourself," Mahkah replied simply. "Your strength, your wisdom, your heart. What more could matter?" Rebecca placed a protective hand over her rounded belly. "And this child? Another man's child. Any child of yours would be welcome as my own," he said with quiet certainty. "Among our people, family is not always about blood." Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes, unexpected but unstoppable. All her life, she had been defined by expectations. A minister's daughter, a proper teacher, then a fallen woman. Never had she been simply accepted for who she was, complete with her choices and their consequences. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, wiping at her cheeks. Mahkah reached out, his hand covering hers, where it rested on her belly. The touch was gentle but sure, a physical affirmation of his words. "Say nothing now. The winter is long, and decisions of the heart should not be rushed like a summer storm." He smiled slightly. "We have time." The warmth of his hand lingered, even after he withdrew it. They sat in companionable silence as the fire burned lower, each contemplating the unexpected path that had brought them to this moment and the various ways forward that now presented themselves. Around them, Whispering Valley lived up to its name, the wind moving through the pines creating a constant soft susurration that seemed to speak of possibilities. Rebecca thought of the creek she had crossed that snowy night, never imagining where the journey would lead. From that desperate flight had come not just sanctuary, but the prospect of a future far different, and perhaps far richer than anything she could have envisioned. As the last embers of the fire glowed red against the darkness, Rebecca made a silent promise to her unborn child. Whatever path she chose, it would be one walked with conviction rather than fear. The world that awaited them might not be the one she had originally planned, but it would be one created from genuine choice rather than mere convention. With that resolution warming her heart, Rebecca finally accepted Mahkah's suggestion to rest. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of their new life in the valley, and with it, the continuation of a story neither of them could have anticipated when a curious teacher first noticed Lakota children peering through her schoolhouse window. Over the following weeks, Whispering Valley transformed from a temporary refuge to a thriving winter encampment. Permanent teepees replaced the hasty shelters of their arrival, positioned in the traditional circle that reflected Lakota social structure. Hunting parties ventured into the surrounding hills, returning with deer, elk, and smaller game that ensured the community would not go hungry despite their hurried departure from their previous location. Rebecca found her place within this new arrangement, her role expanding beyond student of Lakota, ways to contributor in her own right. Her experience as a teacher proved valuable as winter days confined many children to the camp. With Mahkah's blessing, she established informal lessons in a large teepee set aside for community gatherings. There, Lakota children continued their education in English letters and numbers, while Rebecca advanced her own learning of their language and traditions. "You've created a school in the wilderness," Mahkah observed one afternoon as he stopped by to watch her session. The children were engaged in drawing symbols in the dirt floor, practicing both Lakota pictographs and English letters. "Not quite the Prairie Learning House," Rebecca replied with a smile, "but it serves." The mention of her former schoolhouse in Oakridge no longer brought the pang of loss it once had. As her 8th month of pregnancy progressed, Rebecca found herself increasingly oriented toward the future rather than the past. Her condition had become a source of communal interest, with women of all ages offering advice, remedies for discomfort, and stories of their own birthing experiences. Most evenings found Rebecca in Mahkah's family teepee, where she had been fully incorporated into the household. Her relationship with Mahkah had evolved in the weeks since their fireside conversation, growing deeper but also more comfortable, as if they were allowing themselves the luxury of time rather than rushing toward decisions that would shape both their lives. Chief Wanbli observed this development with knowing eyes, but made no comment beyond ensuring that tribal customs were respected. Rebecca had noticed that he often invited Mahkah to accompany him on scouting trips or hunting expeditions that kept him away for days at a time. Perhaps, she sometimes thought, to test the seriousness of his son's intentions through separation. February gave way to March, the valley's sheltered position, allowing early signs of spring to emerge while winter still gripped the plains beyond the hills. Rebecca's time grew near, bringing with it both anticipation and anxiety. Though Mahkah had assured her that several women in the tribe were skilled midwives, the prospect of giving birth so far from conventional medical care occasionally woke her in the night with racing heart. "The child comes when it is ready, not when we are," Mahkah told her one morning, noting Rebecca's discomfort as she struggled to rise from her sleeping furs. "And rarely does birth wait for perfect circumstances." This philosophical approach was tested 3 days later when Rebecca's water broke during an afternoon lesson with the children. The contractions that followed built slowly but inexorably in intensity, confirming that her journey to motherhood had begun in earnest. Word spread quickly through the camp. Children were shooed away, the teaching teepee transformed into a birthing space under Mahkah's direction. Women arrived with clean furs, heated water, and various herbs whose purposes Rebecca couldn't begin to guess. Mahkah paced outside the birthing teepee, his usual composure abandoned as Rebecca's labor intensified. The women had politely but firmly excluded him from the birthing space. Tradition dictated that this was women's territory where men had no place. Even Chief Wanbli respected this boundary, sitting stoically by the central fire, offering occasional glances toward his son's restless movement. "Wearing a path in the earth will not bring the child faster," the chief finally observed, his tone mild but pointed. Mahkah halted, aware of the spectacle he was making. Other men continued their daily activities with deliberate normalcy, though. The occasional concerned look toward the birthing tipi revealed the community's investment in the outcome. This birth was unusual. Not just a new life entering the tribe, but one that bridged worlds in a way few had experienced. "Sit," Wanbli instructed, patting the ground beside him. "Tell me what troubles your spirit." Mahkah hesitated before complying. His relationship with his father had always been one of deep respect rather than easy companionship, making personal confidences rare between them. Yet now, with anxiety coursing through him, the chief's steady presence offered a welcome anchor. "I fear for her," Mahkah admitted, settling beside his father. "She is strong in spirit, but her body is far from her people's medicine." Wanbli nodded thoughtfully. "The white man's medicine has tools, we do not, but our women have guided new life into the world since time began." He studied his son's face. "There is more troubling you than the birth itself." Mahkah stared into the fire, organizing his thoughts. "If both survive," he said carefully, "I wish to make Rebecca my wife, to raise her child as my own." The statement hung in the air between them, though not entirely unexpected given the developments of recent months. Speaking the intention aloud gave it new weight. "You have discussed this with her?" Wanbli asked. "We have spoken of possibilities," Mahkah replied. "Nothing is decided." The chief was silent for a long moment, poking the fire with a stick and watching sparks rise toward the open sky. "Such a union would not be the first between our people and the whites, but it would be uncommon, especially with one who came to us as she did." "Does that concern you?" Mahkah asked directly. Wanbli's weathered face revealed little. "What concerns me is my son's happiness and the strength of our people." He met Mahkah's gaze steadily. "The path you consider would not be easy. Some within the tribe would question your judgment. Some outside would condemn you both. I know this. And still your heart moves in this direction." Mahkah nodded once, definitively. "It does." Wanbli studied him, seeming to search for something in his son's expression. Whatever he found appeared to satisfy him, for he nodded slightly in return. "Then when the time comes, speak your intention to the council. I will support your choice." The simple statement represented a profound endorsement, and Mahkah felt a tension he hadn't fully acknowledged begin to ease. "Thank you, Father." Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp cry from the birthing tipi. Rebecca's voice, raised in pain, before being replaced by murmured encouragements from the women attending her. Mahkah half rose, instinctively moving toward the sound before mastering himself and settling back beside his father. "The waiting is the hardest part," Wanbli observed with the hint of a smile. "It does not get easier with experience." As the afternoon stretched into evening, the sounds from the birthing tipi ebbed and flowed. Mahkah forced himself to eat when food was brought, knowing he needed to maintain his strength, though anxiety dulled his appetite. The sun dipped toward the western hills, casting long shadows across the valley as Rebecca's labor entered its 12th hour. Mahkah emerged briefly as dusk gathered, her expression revealing nothing as she collected fresh water. Mahkah approached her, silently questioning. "The child resists the journey," his mother said, her voice low. "But Rebecca fights. With the strength of a she-wolf protecting her cub, be patient." With that limited reassurance, she returned to the teepee. Another hour passed, then two. Stars emerged overhead, their cold light illuminating the camp where small clusters of people maintained vigil alongside their usual evening activities. The communal nature of Lakota life meant that no significant event, particularly birth or death, was experienced in isolation. It was near midnight when a different cry pierced the night, the unmistakable first wail of a newborn. Mahkah was on his feet instantly, every muscle tensed as he stared at the teepee entrance. Around the camp, conversations paused as heads turned toward the sound. The wait that followed seemed eternal, though it was likely only minutes. Finally, the flap opened and one of the midwives emerged. Her face, tired but smiling, told Mahkah what he needed to know before she spoke. A daughter, she announced, strong lungs and a fighter's spirit. Relief washed through Mahkah in a physical wave. And Rebecca, exhausted but well, she asks, for you? The permission was unprecedented. Men typically didn't enter the birthing space until mother and child had been properly cleaned and prepared for presentation. The break with tradition wasn't lost on those watching, nor on Mahkah himself as he ducked through the tipi entrance. The interior was warm and fragrant with herbs. Several women still moved about, cleaning and organizing, but they paused respectfully. As Mahkah entered, his mother sat beside Rebecca, who reclined on a bed of furs, her hair damp with sweat, but her face illuminated with exhausted joy. In her arms lay a small bundle wrapped in soft buckskin. "Come," Rebecca said softly. "Meet her." Mahkah approached with uncharacteristic hesitation, kneeling beside the makeshift bed. Rebecca shifted the bundle slightly, revealing the tiny face of her daughter, skin still flushed from birth, wisps of dark hair plastered to a perfectly formed head, eyes closed in exhausted sleep. "She's beautiful," Mahkah said, his voice rough, with emotion, like her mother. Rebecca's tired eyes met his, filled with a depth of feeling that transcended their still evolving language of shared words. "I want to name her Clara," she said, "after my grandmother, but I'd like her to have a Lakota name as well." She glanced at Mahkah, if that would be appropriate. The older woman nodded approvingly. It would honor both her worlds. She studied the sleeping infant thoughtfully. "Wichapi," she suggested. "It means star, for she was born under the night sky to light her mother's path." "Clara Wichapi," Rebecca tested the combination. "It's perfect." Mahkah reached out, gently touching the infant's cheek with one finger. The contact seemed to stir something profound within him, a connection that transcended blood relation. "Welcome to the world, little star," he murmured in Lakota. The intimacy of the moment was interrupted as one of the women approached, speaking rapidly to Mahkah. Though Rebecca's understanding of Lakota had improved significantly, the technical terms and quick delivery left her confused. "What is it?" she asked, instinctively drawing Clara closer. Mahkah's expression revealed nothing as she turned to her son. "Riders approach from the South Pass. Warriors have gone to intercept." Mahkah was on his feet immediately, the peaceful moment shattered. "How many?" "4, perhaps 5, moving slowly, as if searching." The implications hung heavily in the air. Few whites ventured this deep into Dakota Territory, especially in early spring when the passes remained treacherous. That they came from the direction of Oakridge suggested a possible connection to the events that had brought Rebecca to the valley. "Stay here," Mahkah instructed Rebecca, his tone shifting from the tender intimacy of moments before to the decisive authority of a warrior. "Rest and care for the child. I will bring word when we know more." Rebecca nodded, though concern clouded her features. "Be careful," she said, the simple phrase carrying the weight of all that now stood between them and uncertainty. Outside, the camp had mobilized with practiced efficiency. Wanbli stood with several elders near the main fire, already receiving reports from scouts. Torches illuminated grim faces as Mahkah joined them. "White men?" one of the scouts was saying. "Soldiers from their garments, though they carry no flag. They make no attempt to hide their approach." A small party suggests scouts rather than an attack. Wanbli observed. "But their presence so deep in our territory is a provocation regardless." Mahkah considered the possibilities. If they come from Fort Harrison, they may be investigating the reports from Oakridge. The settlers might have convinced them that we were responsible for Rebecca's disappearance. Wanbli nodded grimly. 4 months have passed. Why search now, when snow still clogs the lower passes? Perhaps they found evidence, another elder suggested. Something that pointed toward the valley. The implication sent a ripple of unease through the group. If the soldiers had somehow tracked Rebecca's journey, it could bring larger forces once the pass is cleared completely with the spring thaw. "We must learn their purpose," Wanbli decided. "Mahkah, take 4 warriors and meet these intruders before they come closer to our camp. Do not attack unless threatened, but make our boundaries clear." Mahkah nodded, already selecting warriors from those gathered nearby. As they collected weapons and prepared to depart, he glanced back toward the teepee where Rebecca and her newborn daughter rested, unaware of the potential threat approaching their sanctuary. The timing seemed cruelly deliberate, as if fate was determined to test their newly formed bonds at the moment of greatest vulnerability. Within minutes, Mahkah and his small party were mounted and moving through the darkness toward the southern pass. They traveled without torches, their eyes adjusted to the starlight and their knowledge of the terrain guiding them. The valley narrowed as they approached the pass, rocky walls rising on either side to create a natural bottleneck. They positioned themselves at a bend in the trail, where approaching riders would have little warning of their presence. Mahkah distributed his warriors strategically, ensuring they could control the narrow space without being immediately visible to anyone entering. From the south, the wait was brief. Soon, the soft sound of hooves on the rocky trail reached them, along with the occasional clink of metal equipment that confirmed the approaching party was likely military. Mahkah raised his hand, signaling his warriors to remain hidden until his command. 5 riders emerged around the bend, moving cautiously in the darkness. Their uniform silhouettes were visible against the night sky. Cavalry from Fort Harrison, as suspected. The lead rider drew up sharply as Mahkah stepped into their path, rifle raised, but not yet aimed directly at them. "You travel far from your territory," Mahkah said in clear English, his voice carrying in the confined space. "State your purpose." The soldiers reacted with predictable tension, hands moving to weapons, though none drew immediately. The leader, a lieutenant by his insignia, regarded Mahkah with wary assessment. "We seek information," the officer replied stiffly. "Reports have reached Fort Harrison of a woman who went missing from the settlement at Oakridge this past winter. Evidence suggests she may have come this way. Many things vanish in winter storms," Mahkah responded neutrally. "The snow takes what it will." "This was no natural disappearance," another soldier interjected, his tone hostile. "The woman was a teacher, Rebecca Taylor. Settlers believe she was taken by Lakota raiders." The direct mention of Rebecca's name confirmed Mahkah's fears. Somehow they had tracked her this far, or at least harbored strong suspicions. "Why would Lakota take a white teacher?" Mahkah asked, keeping his expression impassive despite the surge of protective anger the accusation triggered. "We have our own ways of teaching." The lieutenant studied him thoughtfully. "Witnesses say she had been instructing Indian children against the community's wishes. Some believe she may have had sympathies. That made her a target." The twisted logic was both absurd and dangerous, suggesting that Rebecca's compassion for Lakota children had somehow justified her supposed abduction in the settlers' minds. Mahkah recognized the narrative being constructed. A young woman led, astray by misguided sympathy, then victimized by the very people she had tried to help. "Your search is wasted," Mahkah said firmly. "No white woman was taken by the Lakota. If your teacher vanished, look to your own people for answers. Perhaps she found their company less appealing than they believed." At this pointed suggestion, The hostile soldier started forward, only to freeze as Mahkah's warriors emerged from their hiding places, bows drawn and aimed. The lieutenant raised his hand sharply, halting his subordinate's rash movement. "We have orders to investigate all possibilities," the officer said carefully, his eyes tracking the warriors now visible around them. The woman's disappearance has caused considerable concern. She was with child. The addition of this detail suggested the soldiers knew more than initial reports might have indicated. Mahkah kept his expression neutral, though internally he calculated how much information might have reached them and from what source. "This pass leads nowhere you wish to go," Mahkah stated, deliberately changing the subject. "Whispering Valley beyond belongs to the Lakota. You are not welcome to proceed further." The standoff lingered, tension crackling in the cool night air. Finally, the lieutenant nodded curtly. "We'll make camp here tonight and consider our options. But be advised, if evidence of the woman is found, more soldiers will follow. Then you will find nothing but your own tracks when the snow melts," Mahkah replied evenly. "The Lakota have no quarrel with Fort Harrison unless one is forced upon us." With a final measuring look, Mahkah stepped aside, allowing the soldiers room to turn their horses. They retreated a short distance down the trail, still within the confines of the pass, but far enough to establish separation between the groups. Mahkah stationed 2 warriors to maintain watch on the soldiers' position before returning with the others to report to Wanbli. The camp was tense upon their return, women gathering children close and men checking weapons in anticipation of potential conflict. Wanbli listened grimly to Mahkah's account of the encounter. "They seek her specifically," he noted. "This is troubling." "They cannot be certain she is here," Mahkah argued. "They suspect, nothing more." "Suspicion is often enough for the white man's soldiers," one of the elders commented, "especially when they seek justification to move against our lands." The implications hung heavily in the council circle. If the soldiers reported that the Lakota were preventing their search, regardless of the legitimacy of that search, it could provide the pretext for a larger military presence once the spring thaw made the passes more accessible. "What of Rebecca?" Mahkah Yang asked from the edge of the circle, where she had joined them after ensuring mother and child were resting comfortably. "Should she be told?" Wanbli considered this question thoughtfully. "Not tonight," he finally decided. "She has given life today. Let her have this peace before new worries come." Mahkah nodded in agreement, though the decision sat uneasily with him. Rebecca had faced enough manipulation and exclusion among her own people. He was reluctant to begin their future with concealment, however well-intentioned. "And tomorrow?" he pressed. "She deserves to know the truth." "Tomorrow is soon enough," Wanbli conceded. "For now, we must decide how to address these soldiers when day comes." The council debated options well into the night. Some argued for standing firm, preventing any further incursion into the valley. Others suggested allowing a limited search under strict supervision, a compromise that might satisfy the military presence without revealing Rebecca's actual location. Mahkah listened to all perspectives, his thoughts churning with possibilities. When it came his turn to speak, his proposal surprised many. "Let me approach them alone, at first light," he suggested, "not as a warrior but as one who wishes to prevent misunderstanding. I will tell them that a white woman did indeed come to us, but of her own free will, seeking sanctuary after being cast out by her own people." Murmurs rippled through the circle. Such honesty carried significant risk, particularly with soldiers already predisposed to view the Lakota with suspicion. "And if they demand her return," one elder challenged, "then we make clear she's under our protection by her own choice," Mahkah replied steadily. "That she has become a mother and is in no condition to travel. We offer them the opportunity to verify her well-being themselves, but only if they come in peace and without weapons." Wanbli studied his son, recognizing the strategy behind the proposal. By acknowledging Rebecca's presence but framing it as sanctuary rather than abduction, they might diffuse the most dangerous aspect of the situation, the presumption of hostility. It could work, the chief admitted, or it could bring the full force of Fort Harrison down upon us once they confirm she is here. They will learn the truth eventually, Mahkah countered. Better it comes from us, shaped by honesty, than discovered through suspicion and treated as proof of deception. The council deliberated further, weighing risks against benefits. Eventually, Wanbli raised his hand for silence. "My son's words have wisdom," he pronounced. "We will try this path. Mahkah will speak to the soldiers at dawn, with warriors positioned, out of sight but ready if needed." He looked around the circle gravely. "And we will prepare the people for the possibility that we may need to move again, should his words fail to find understanding." The decision made, the council dispersed to communicate the plan throughout camp. Mahkah returned to the berthing teepee, where Rebecca had finally fallen into exhausted sleep. Clara nestled securely against her. He settled quietly near the entrance, unwilling to disturb them, yet equally unwilling to leave them unguarded while potential threat lingered so near. Mahkah joined him, her expression knowing as she observed his protective vigilance. "You would die for them," she stated simply. It wasn't a question, but Mahkah nodded anyway. "Yes. And live for them too," his mother added. "Which is often the harder path. If the soldiers insist on taking her back," he began. Mahkah's expression hardened. "They would have to take all of us. The council has spoken. She is under our protection now." The fierce assertion warmed Mahkah's heart, affirming that Rebecca and Clara had indeed been accepted into the tribe's collective care. Yet he harbored no illusions about the potential consequences of defying military authorities. If the situation escalated, the safety of the entire tribe would be at stake. Morning arrived too soon, pale light filtering through the smoke flap of the teepee. Mahkah had dozed upright through the remaining hours of darkness, waking fully alert as Rebecca stirred. Her eyes opened, immediately seeking her daughter before registering his presence. "You stayed," she murmured, voice rough from the previous day's exertions. "I wanted to be near," he replied simply. Rebecca's smile faded as she noted the tension in his posture. "Something's wrong." The moment for truth had arrived sooner than he'd anticipated. Mahkah moved closer, keeping his voice low to avoid disturbing the still sleeping infant. "Soldiers from Fort Harrison have come through the South Pass," he explained, watching her face carefully. "They search for you." Fear flickered in Rebecca's eyes, her arm tightening instinctively around Clara. How? How could they know to look here?" "They don't know with certainty," Mahkah assured her, "but they suspect. Something led them to investigate this direction." Rebecca processed this information, her mind working despite exhaustion. "Sarah," she finally said, "my friend from Oakridge. She helped me escape that night. Perhaps under pressure, she revealed which direction I fled." The explanation made sense. A concerned friend might eventually break silence if she believed Rebecca had perished in the storm and that her body deserved proper burial. "What will happen now?" Rebecca asked, fully alert despite her physical weakness. Mahkah outlined the council's decision and his planned approach to the soldiers. As he spoke, he watched uncertainty war with determination in her expression. "I could speak to them myself," she suggested. "Show them I'm here willingly." "Not yet," Mahkah replied firmly. "You've just given birth. Your strength must be for Clara now." He hesitated, then added, "And if they came with orders to return you regardless of your wishes?" The implication hung between them. Military authority might override personal choice, particularly for a woman whose judgment could be questioned due to her compromised situation as an unmarried mother. "I won't go back," Rebecca stated, her voice gaining strength. "This is my home now, our home." She looked down at Clara, then back to Mahkah with unwavering resolve. "Whatever must be done to secure that, I'm prepared to face it." The declaration settled something within Mahkah. He reached out, gently touching first Clara's head, then Rebecca's cheek, in a gesture that communicated what words might fail to capture. "Rest now," he said. "Regain your strength. I will return after speaking with the soldiers." Rebecca caught his hand before he could withdraw it. "Be careful," she whispered. "Come back to us." The simple plea carried the weight of all that remained, unspoken between them. The future they had begun to envision together, now threatened by the outside world's intrusion. "Always," he promised. Outside, the camp was already fully alert, preparations underway for either peaceful resolution or potential conflict. Warriors positioned themselves discreetly throughout the valley, while women gathered essential supplies that could be quickly packed if evacuation became necessary. Wanbli waited near the central fire, his face composed but grave. "You are prepared?" he asked as Mahkah approached. "Yes," Mahkah replied, checking his weapons one final time. He would carry them, but approach with empty hands to signify peaceful intent. "I've told Rebecca. She understands what's at stake." Wanbli studied his son. "And if they refuse your explanation, if they demand her return, then we must be prepared for the consequences of refusing," Mahkah said steadily. "But I believe there may be a way to satisfy their concerns without surrendering her." The chief nodded, acknowledging the difficult balance they sought to strike. "Go then. May your words find wisdom in their hearing." With a final glance toward the teepee where Rebecca and Clara remained, Mahkah mounted his horse and set off toward the southern pass. The morning air was crisp, the valley floor still in shadow, though sunlight had begun to illuminate the upper slopes of the surrounding hills. It would be a beautiful spring day, incongruously peaceful given the tension that stretched between the Lakota camp and the military intruders. Two warriors accompanied him part way, then faded into the landscape, taking positions where they could observe and report back if necessary. Mahkah continued alone, deliberately adopting an unhurried pace to signal confidence rather than aggression. The soldiers had established a basic camp within the pass, their horses picketed nearby, and a small fire burning. They tensed visibly. As Mahkah approached, hands moving to weapons, though none were drawn. The lieutenant stepped forward, watching warily as Mahkah reined in his horse at a respectful distance. "I come to speak, not to fight," Mahkah stated clearly, raising empty hands. The officer nodded curtly. "We're listening." Mahkah dismounted slowly, maintaining eye contact to demonstrate his peaceful intentions. Once on solid ground, he addressed the matter directly. "You seek Rebecca Taylor," he began, watching their reactions carefully. "The teacher from Oakridge who disappeared during the winter storm." The lieutenant's eyes narrowed. "So you know of her?" "Yes," Mahkah confirmed. "She came to us that night, half frozen and desperate. We gave her shelter. The admission triggered immediate tension among the soldiers. The same hostile man from the previous evening stepped forward, hand on his sidearm. Then the settlers were right. You took her." "We took no one," Mahkah corrected firmly. "She came seeking refuge after her own people cast her out, for the crime of teaching Lakota children alongside white ones." The lieutenant held up a hand, silencing his subordinates. Angry response. "You expect us to believe she fled into a blizzard voluntarily? A pregnant woman alone?" "Ask her yourself," Mahkah challenged. "She is with us still, by her own choice." This confirmation of Rebecca's location changed the dynamic instantly. The soldiers exchanged glances, their posture shifting from uncertain to determined. "Then we must insist on seeing her," the lieutenant stated. Our orders are to investigate her disappearance and return her to civilization if found. Mahkah had anticipated this response. She gave birth yesterday, he informed them, watching surprise register on their faces. Both mother and daughter are well but in no condition to travel. You may confirm this for yourself, but only under peaceful terms. The revelation of the birth complicated matters visibly for the lieutenant, who had clearly not expected such developments. A missing woman was one matter. A new mother and infant presented additional considerations. "What terms do you propose?" he finally asked, his tone marginally less hostile. "You and one other may accompany me to our camp," Mahkah outlined. "Unarmed. You may speak with Rebecca Taylor yourself and confirm that she is here by choice and in good health. The rest of your men remain here." The lieutenant considered the offer, clearly weighing military protocol against the practical realities of their situation. 5 soldiers against an entire Lakota camp would be at a severe disadvantage if conflict erupted, yet failing to investigate further wasn't an option given their orders. "Agreed," he said finally. "Myself and Corporal Davis will accompany you. The others will remain here, but will report to Fort Harrison if we do not return by sundown." The implicit threat wasn't lost on Mahkah, but he nodded acceptance of the arrangement. "Fair terms. We depart when you're ready." The journey back to camp was conducted in tense silence, Mahkah leading with the 2 soldiers following on their own mounts. As they approached the valley floor, the full extent of the Lakota encampment became visible. Teepees arranged in the traditional circle, smoke rising from cooking fires, daily activities proceeding with deliberate normalcy despite the undercurrent of watchfulness. The lieutenant surveyed the scene with professional assessment. "Larger settlement than we expected in this valley." "Our winter camp," Mahkah explained, "protected from the harsher weather of the plains." Eyes followed their progress as they rode into camp. Warriors stood at strategic points, their presence neither hidden nor overtly threatening. Women gathered children closer, and elders watched with expressions that revealed generations of justified wariness toward uniformed white. Men. At the central fire, Wanbli waited, his bearing every bit as formal and authoritative as any military officer's. Mahkah made introductions with careful precision, emphasizing his father's position as chief and the respect due him. The lieutenant, to his credit, recognized the diplomatic nature of the moment and dismounted to greet Wanbli with appropriate deference. "We understand you shelter a woman from Oakridge settlement," the officer stated, dispensing with preliminaries. "Rebecca Taylor. We've been sent to investigate her disappearance." Wanbli's expression remained impassive. "The woman you seek came to us in need. We offered sanctuary, as is our way when someone approaches with honest heart. We were told, 'She teaches your children,'" the corporal interjected, his tone suggesting suspicion rather than approval of such cultural exchange. "She shares knowledge, and we share ours in return," Wanbli confirmed. "Knowledge belongs to no single people." The philosophical response clearly wasn't what the soldiers had expected. The lieutenant redirected the conversation to more practical matters. "Your son tells us she has recently given birth. We request to see her to confirm her condition and preferences regarding her situation." Wanbli considered this request with deliberate gravity, though the outcome had been predetermined by the council. "You may speak with her briefly, but understand, she's under our protection now, by her choice and ours. We will respect her wishes, whatever they may be." The implied limitation on their authority wasn't lost on the lieutenant, whose jaw tightened visibly. Nevertheless, he nodded agreement to the terms. Mahkah led the way to the birthing teepee, pausing outside to announce their presence. Rebecca's voice, stronger than he had expected, granted permission to enter. The soldiers hesitated at the threshold, perhaps suddenly uncertain about the propriety of intruding on a new mother. "Come!" Rebecca called, sensing their hesitation. "I'm decent." Mahkah ducked inside first, ensuring all was appropriate before the soldiers followed. Rebecca sat propped against furs, Clara cradled in her arms. She had clearly prepared for this moment. Her hair was neatly braided, her clothing adjusted, to present as dignified an appearance as possible, given the circumstances. Mahkah sat nearby, her presence both supportive and protective. The lieutenant removed his hat as he entered, a reflexive gesture of respect that spoke to his upbringing. "Miss Taylor," he began formally, "I'm Lieutenant James Wilson, from Fort Harrison. We've been searching for you since reports of your disappearance reached us." Rebecca's gaze was steady, revealing nothing of the anxiety Mahkah knew she must feel. "As you can see, Lieutenant, I am perfectly safe. Though I appreciate the concern that prompted your search." The corporal stared openly at the scene before him, the white schoolteacher in a Lakota teepee, holding a newborn, appearing remarkably at ease in surroundings that must seem utterly foreign to her former life. "Ma'am, the settlers at Oakridge reported you missing after a town meeting," the lieutenant explained carefully. "There were concerns about the circumstances of your departure." "You mean they drove me out and then pretended to worry when I didn't conveniently die in the storm?" Rebecca replied, her tone mild, but words pointed. How thoughtful of them to express concern months later. The blunt assessment clearly surprised the soldiers. The lieutenant shifted uncomfortably before continuing. "We were told you had been teaching Indian children against community wishes and that this created tension." "I taught children," Rebecca corrected. "Some were Lakota, some were white. All deserved education." She looked down at Clara, adjusting the blanket around her tiny form. "For this and for my condition, the town council declared me unfit and arranged my removal. When they came with torches, I fled rather than face their escort to Fort Harrison." "And you came directly to the Indian camp?" the corporal asked skeptically. "I had nowhere else to go," Rebecca explained simply. "I became lost in the storm. Mahkah found me near death and brought me here. The Lakota offered shelter when my own people offered only judgment." Her calm recounting of events, delivered without obvious bitterness despite the injustice described, carried a ring of truth that was difficult to dismiss. The lieutenant studied her thoughtfully. "And now, with your child born, do you wish to return to Fort Harrison? Arrangements could be made for your care and passage east, if desired." It was the question they had all anticipated, the crux of the matter that would determine what followed. Rebecca's gaze met Mahkah's briefly before she answered with quiet certainty. "No, Lieutenant. My place is here now, with people who have accepted both me and my daughter without condition. I have no desire to return to a society that rejected me, nor to journey east where no welcome awaits." The corporal frowned, clearly struggling with this declaration. "Ma'am, surely you don't mean to raise a white child among savages?" The journey to Fort Harrison took 3 days, traveling at a pace mindful of Rebecca's recent childbirth. Lieutenant Wilson maintained a respectful distance, neither treating her as prisoner nor pretending the situation was entirely normal. The soldiers' curious glances followed Rebecca and Mahkah, this unlikely pair crossing boundaries far more significant than mere geography. Each night as they camped, Rebecca felt Clara's absence like a physical ache. Her body still responded to her daughter's schedule, milk coming despite the infant's distance. Mahkah observed her discomfort silently, offering quiet strength when words would fail. "Do you regret this decision?" he asked on the second night as they sat slightly apart from the soldiers. Rebecca considered the question honestly. "Not the choice itself," she finally answered, "only that it was necessary at all." Fort Harrison rose from the prairie on the morning of the 4th day, its wooden walls stark against the spring landscape. The military outpost represented the advancing edge of American expansion, a physical manifestation of the pressures reshaping the Western Territories. Rebecca straightened her shoulders as they approached, conscious of the symbolic weight her presence carried. The fort's commander, Colonel James Hargrove, awaited their arrival in the parade ground. A career officer with graying temples and a carefully maintained mustache, he watched with undisguised surprise as Rebecca rode in voluntarily alongside Mahkah. "Lieutenant Wilson," the colonel acknowledged, his eyes never leaving the unexpected pair. "I see your mission yielded unconventional results." Miss Taylor agreed to return and provide her statement officially, Wilson explained, along with a representative from the Lakota to ensure transparency. Colonel Hargrove's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. How considerate of the Lakota to return what was taken. "Nothing was taken, Colonel," Rebecca interjected firmly, dismounting with Mahkah's assistance. "I sought refuge with the Lakota after Oakridge settlement drove me out. They offered sanctuary when my own people rejected me." The colonel's eyebrows rose at her direct address. "Indeed, that rather contradicts the accounts we've received from Oakridge, which is precisely why I've come," Rebecca replied, "to correct the record before misunderstandings lead to unnecessary conflict." Hargrove studied her, noting her blend of Lakota and settler clothing, the confident way she stood beside Mahkah rather than apart from him. "Very well, we'll conduct a formal interview immediately. Lieutenant Wilson, escort Miss Taylor to my office." "Mahkah accompanies me," Rebecca stated, not as request but as condition. "That was our agreement." The colonel's jaw tightened at this assertion of terms, but after a moment's consideration he nodded curtly. "Unusual, but acceptable. This way." The colonel's office reflected military precision. Maps of the territory covered one wall, correspondence neatly stacked on a solid desk, a small portrait of President Grant as the only personal touch. Rebecca and Mahkah were offered chairs, while a clerk was summoned to record the interview. "Now then," Hargrove began when formalities were complete, "perhaps you'd explain exactly how you came to abandon your position in Oakridge and take up residence with the Lakota." Rebecca met his gaze steadily. "I didn't abandon anything, Colonel. I was explicitly informed by the town council that my services were no longer required due to my choice to educate Lakota children alongside the settlers' children and due to my unmarried pregnant state." The directness of her reference to her condition clearly caught Hargrove off guard, though he recovered quickly. "And rather than accept their decision, you fled to the Indians?" "I fled for my life," Rebecca corrected. "The council came with torches at night, intending to escort me forcibly to the stagecoach stop. I chose a different path, literally and figuratively." Over the next hour, Rebecca recounted everything: her arrival in Oakridge, the children watching through the window, her decision to teach them, the community's growing hostility, and finally, the winter night she crossed Willow Creek. She described Mahkah finding her near death in the snow, the tribe's acceptance of her despite her obvious differences, and her decision to remain even after her daughter's birth. Throughout her testimony, Mahkah remained silent but watchful, his presence lending weight to her words. The clerk's pen scratched steadily, capturing every detail of this unconventional narrative. When she finished, Colonel Hargrove leaned back, his expression thoughtful rather than dismissive as she had feared. "A remarkable tale, Miss Taylor, and not without certain precedents in frontier history." "It's not a tale, Colonel," Rebecca responded firmly. "It's my life, and now my daughter's life as well." "Ah, yes, the child." Hargrove's gaze shifted to Mahkah momentarily. "Born among the Lakota, I understand. Where is the infant now?" "Safe, with Mahkah's family," Rebecca answered, instantly alert to the potential danger in the question. I left her there deliberately to demonstrate both my trust in the Lakota and my intention to return promptly." The colonel nodded slowly. "A bold strategy, and one that speaks to your conviction regarding this situation." He turned to Mahkah directly. "And your people accepted this arrangement, taking responsibility for a white woman's child?" Mahkah met the officer's gaze unflinchingly. "We see no white child," he replied evenly. "Only a new life connected to our community through her mother's choice and our acceptance." Hargrove's eyebrows rose slightly at this perspective. "Interesting. And what does Chief Wanbli expect to gain from this unusual arrangement?" "The question assumes calculation where there is only humanity," Mahkah responded. "My father offered sanctuary to someone in need. The only expectation was that she would contribute to our community according to her abilities, which she has done, teaching our children as she once taught those in Oakridge." The simple dignity of this response appeared to affect the colonel, more than any heated defense might have. He studied the pair before him with fresh assessment, seeing perhaps for the first time the genuine connection between them rather than the politically convenient narrative of captivity. "You understand," he said finally, addressing both of them, "that this situation creates certain complications from an administrative perspective. The settlement at Oakridge falls under military protection. Their claims regarding Lakota interference with a citizen cannot be dismissed without consideration. Their claims are false," Rebecca stated flatly. "And if you've recorded my testimony accurately, you now have official documentation of that fact." Hargrove tapped his fingers thoughtfully on his desk. "Nevertheless, there are those who would find it more convenient if you remained here at Fort Harrison or returned east entirely." "I won't be separated from my daughter," Rebecca replied, her voice steady but implacable, "and she remains with the people who have become our family." The colonel studied her with something approaching respect. "You've developed considerable conviction during your time with the Lakota, Miss Taylor. It's quite different from the reports describing a confused young woman led astray by misplaced sympathies." "I've found clarity, Colonel. Perhaps that's what troubles those who preferred me confused and compliant." An unexpected smile briefly touched Hargrove's features. "Aptly observed." He turned to the clerk. "That will be all for now. Prepare a clean transcript for my review." When they were alone, the colonel's demeanor shifted subtly, less the official representative of military authority, more the pragmatic man navigating complex realities beyond rigid policy. "Off the record, Miss Taylor, your situation presents me with a dilemma. The political pressures regarding Indian affairs are intensifying. Some would use your case to justify increased military action against the Lakota, regardless of the actual facts." "And what do you intend to do, Colonel?" Rebecca asked directly. Hargrove considered her question carefully. "I'm inclined to report that you came to Fort Harrison voluntarily, provided a full statement clarifying the circumstances of your departure from Oakridge, and demonstrated no signs of coercion or captivity." He glanced at Mahkah. "I'll note that the Lakota leadership cooperated fully with our investigation, sending a representative to ensure transparency. The potential resolution seemed almost too straightforward after the tension of recent days." "And then?" Rebecca pressed. "And then you would be free to leave, returning to wherever you choose to make your home." The colonel's phrasing deliberately acknowledged her agency in the matter, with the understanding that this official finding should end any justification for military action regarding your specific case. Relief washed through Rebecca, though she maintained her composed exterior. "That seems reasonable, Colonel. When might this process be completed?" "The transcript will be ready by morning. After you've reviewed and signed it, there would be no official reason to delay your departure." Hargrove paused, then added with unexpected candor, Though I would recommend considering your longer-term safety. Oakridge may not welcome your return, and the Lakota may face increased scrutiny with you among them. His implied warning wasn't lost on either Rebecca or Mahkah. The official resolution of her case wouldn't necessarily change underlying prejudices or political opportunism. We've discussed relocating the camp once spring fully establishes itself, Mahkah stated carefully. Perhaps farther from settlement. Borders would be prudent for all concerned. Hargrove nodded, the unspoken understanding passing between them. Physical distance might provide the space needed for this unusual situation to stabilize without further intervention. A wise consideration, the colonel remarked. Now you must be tired from your journey. Quarters have been prepared. We'll reconvene in the morning to finalize matters. As promised, the following day brought formal conclusion to what had begun as potential conflict. Rebecca reviewed the transcript carefully, finding it a fair representation of her testimony. With Mahkah as witness, she signed the document that officially classified her as a voluntary resident among the Lakota rather than a captive. Colonel Hargrove provided them with supplies for their return journey, a gesture that acknowledged both the legitimacy of their departure and perhaps offered subtle amends for the circumstances that had brought them there. "Safe travels, Miss Taylor," the colonel said as they prepared to leave. "I trust you'll find your daughter thriving upon your return." "Thank you, Colonel," Rebecca replied sincerely, "for listening to the truth rather than convenient narratives." Hargrove's expression suggested he recognized the rarity of such choices in his position. The frontier produces unexpected situations that rarely fit neatly into established categories. Sometimes wisdom lies in acknowledging that reality rather than forcing conformity. With this philosophical observation, he offered a formal salute to Mahkah, a gesture of respect between men of different worlds but similar responsibilities. The return journey to Whispering Valley passed without incident, though Rebecca's anxiety to reunite with Clara grew with each mile. By the final day, she rode with barely contained impatience, urging her mare to greater speed as the valley's entrance came into view. Scouts had obviously reported their approach, for a small, welcoming party awaited them at the valley's edge. Mahkah stood at its center, Clara secured in a traditional cradleboard on her back. Rebecca dismounted before her horse had fully stopped, rushing forward with tears streaming freely. Mahkah unfastened the cradleboard with practiced hands, transferring the now wriggling infant to her mother's eager arms. "She has missed your heartbeat," the older woman observed gently, "but she has not lacked for love in your absence." "Thank you," Rebecca whispered, unable to express the depth of her gratitude as she held her daughter close, breathing in her perfect scent. Clara blinked up at her, tiny features scrunching in concentration before relaxing in apparent recognition. Mahkah approached more slowly, allowing mother and child their moment of reunion before joining them. His hand rested lightly on Rebecca's shoulder as he bent to look at Clara. "She has grown already," he noted with wonder, "even in these few days." The simple observation crystallized something within Rebecca. The swift passage of time, the precious nature of these moments, the importance of the choices that would shape her daughter's future. With sudden clarity, she turned to face Mahkah directly. "I don't want to wait any longer," she said, her voice quiet but unwavering. "If your offer still stands, I choose this path. I choose you as Clara's father, as my husband, as our future." The declaration, made beneath the open sky at the entrance to the valley that had become their sanctuary, carried the weight of absolute conviction. Mahkah's expression transformed, pride and joy breaking through his customary reserve. "The offer stands," he confirmed, his hand moving to cradle both Rebecca and Clara in a protective embrace. "Two paths becoming one," Mahkah observed. The moment with knowing eyes, her weathered face creasing in a smile of approval. "Come," she said simply, "the people wait to hear what has passed, and to celebrate what begins." As they walked together into the valley, Rebecca felt the complex journey that had brought her here coalesce into perfect certainty. From the schoolhouse in Oakridge to this wild, beautiful place, from rejection to acceptance, from isolation to community. Each step, however difficult, had led precisely where she needed to be. Clara stirred against her chest, a small hand, escaping the blanket to wave in the spring air. Like her mother, she would grow between worlds, carrying the wisdom of both, limited by neither. The thought filled Rebecca with fierce purpose and profound peace simultaneously. The path ahead would hold challenges still, the shifting pressures of settlement expansion, the realities of raising a child of mixed heritage, the daily work of building understanding where prejudice had long prevailed. But these challenges would be faced together within a circle of strength that had been tested and proven resilient. Whispering Valley opened before them, its namesake sound, the constant murmur of wind through pine branches, welcoming them home. And in that gentle, persistent voice, Rebecca heard the promise of stories yet to be told, of bridges yet to be built, of a future where barriers between peoples might fall one family, one child, one courageous choice at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.